Ooh, there you are. Welcome back to the weekend with me, Dawn Neeson. Thank you for joining me on a Sunday lunchtime. I hope you're having a lovely weekend out there. Now, this one's going to annoy you though, sorry about that. A group of 15 Caribbean nations will ask the King and Sir Keir Starmer to pay 200 billion in slavery reparations. That's when the countries meet at the Commonwealth Summit later this month. I think it's literally 21st, I think. They are expected to say that reparations to slavery and colonialism should be part of a new global reset. I have no idea what that actually means. Let's see what my panel make of this one. I'm going to come to you first on this one, Emma, because you're spitting feathers, literally spitting feathers in the corner. OK, so time to say it's a fair cop garb. We were bad 200 years ago. Here, have all our money.
Money doesn't change the past. It's far more meaningful to acknowledge the past, to learn from history and to make positive changes for the future. Every time we have these Commonwealth Heads of Summit meeting, the one in Samoa, I think coming up 21st, there are demands for huge amounts of money, 200 billion. It puts our sort of fiscal black hole into the shade, doesn't it?
Yeah, Rachel Reeves will really be spitting feathers.
Be eating a bagel on this one. Presumably, we will end up giving billions and billions of pounds, given that our Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, has been very vocal about this. He's been very, very critical, fiercely critical about he talks about the twisted lies of imperialism, the slaves stolen from homes in shackles. David Lammy actually supported the toppling of the Edward Colston statue in Bristol, and he is apparently descended from enslaved families. King Charles has said that slavery is a conversation whose time has come. Absolutely. Let's have a conversation about it. Let's talk about history. Let's not try and erase it. Let's not try and topple statues. Let's teach our children about slavery and about the wrongs of the past. But paying 200 billion or paying 1 billion is ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. It doesn't change anything, and we certainly shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, I mean, the estimates on how much it is, it ranges from 206 billion up to 19 trillion. I don't even know what a trillion is, but it sounds like an awful lot of money.
How does that make reparations?
It's been officially worked out, hasn't it? But I mean, I don't know how they've set numbers on this. But I mean, the problem now that Keir Starmer and Labour have got, as Emma has alluded to, Michael, is that a party that's obsessed with being on the right side of history must somehow now wriggle out of bankrupting the country by handing over reparations.
I mean, if you did that over a long period of time, I don't think it would bankrupt the country. In terms of where the sort of figures are from, I think this was a sort of Cambridge theology.
It is an official report,
yeah. Came up with a £200 billion figure. I suppose also the part I agree with you on is that more important is sort of making changes into the future.
Yes.
But I suppose the argument for this, and I'm not going to pluck a number out of the air and say I agree with it, is that slavery isn't just in the past in the sense that part of our wealth comes from it and part of the problems in those countries comes from the fact. You said David Lammy apparently descended from slaves. Every single black person in the Caribbean is descended from slaves because every black person taken to the Caribbean was taken in a slave ship, right? So this was 3.4 million people were transported in British ships to the Caribbean, and they were transported to the Caribbean so that they could make profit for British people, which then got invested in the Industrial Revolution that we had, which is part of why we live so comfortably today. So I think the idea that we say part of our wealth is from the criminal exploitation of your ancestors, let's try and make amends. Now, that shouldn't probably just be in sort of let's make a transfer of 200 billion quid, but if it is some sort of development aid or some sort of arrangement whereby we say one of the reasons we're so rich is because we exploited you guys, therefore, to make amends, let's try and help you along your path to development in the same way that we have sort of enjoyed.
We give billions in foreign aid. We're an incredibly generous country. Our foreign aid budget is, 11 billion? We are an extremely generous country. Also, individually, I think people in this country are incredibly generous, and we travel abroad, we welcome people of all, cultures and faiths and religions and everything. So I just don't see, there isn't a single person living alive today who is responsible for what happened. But we absolutely need to have that conversation and acknowledge it. But I'm afraid demands for billions and billions of pounds are completely crazy.
Just very, very quickly, I'm running out of time. What about the black people, families might be descended from slaves back in the past, who are struggling now financially? They're going to be struggling to pay their heating bills, they're struggling to put food on the table in this country.
Well, hold
on a minute, I've got to pay more money over now. What about those people? And what about the working class in the past whose kids were shoved up chimneys? Why do they owe money from something that happened 200 years ago? That's nothing to do with them, and they're struggling now.
Well, I mean, I suppose if this was an amount of money that was going to bankrupt us, then obviously we shouldn't do it. But if it's the kind of figure which we can afford over a long period of time, which is going to make a bigger difference in those countries than it will do here because we're a lot richer than they are, I can see why there might be an argument for it. I mean, also, you've kind of invented a black person who's angry about reparations. You know, it might well be the case, and I imagine it would be, that in general black people in this country are more sympathetic to the idea of reparations than white people.
If you happen to be a black person out there and you are watching this and you are struggling paying your bills over here and you're suddenly thinking, hold on a minute, anything between 206 billion to a staggering 19 trillion, let's know how you feel about that. gbnews.com/your say.
It's not so much the sum. I think it's the principle of the idea that we're paying to apologise for something that we've acknowledged is extremely wrong and will never happen again.
We have run out of time, but as I say, let us know what you think. I mean, if you are struggling over here, I mean, you know, Rachel Reeves is wetting the knickers over that mysterious black hole of 22 billion, isn't she? I mean, what's she going to think? OK, now we are moving on. If you could choose between having an expensive metal tower that ruins the landscape to transport power across the country or cheaper underground cables, which one do you think you'd pick? Well, Energy Secretary Ed Miliband says build the pylons. And we are talking blooming big pylons. Some of them are 600 foot tall, evidently. Thousands of expensive metal towers will be built across East Anglia, despite an official report finding that burying cables underground is cheaper over the long term. Campaigners are accusing Miliband of pursuing a dogmatic agenda and warn of pitchfork battles with rural communities. Golly gosh, I'm having visions of people turning up with flaming torches at Ed Miliband's house. Not suggesting you do, by the way. Let's see what my panel make of this. Michael, I'm going to come to you first on this one. We have had a report now that burying the cables underground is cheaper than sticking pylons all over our countryside. So is he just being dogmatic rather than realistic on this one?
Well, I think there's a danger of overstating the significance of this single report. So I've sort of been going back to what politicians have been saying about this over time. And just last year, so the Conservative government said it was 10 times more expensive to bury these wires than to put them on pylons. And that makes sense. You have to dig a huge hole. Even this report said that this wouldn't get built until 2034 if we were to do it underground.
Yes.
The Labour version gets it built much quicker. So I think Labour are really onto something, actually, and I'm critical of them on many respects, really onto something when they say we need to start just building stuff. You know, enough with the incredibly long sort of legal processes whereby people can say, I don't want to see that in the field, right? I walk my dog on the Hackney Marshes, there are pylons there. They look fine, you know. You can just accept that we live in an industrial society, and sometimes you're going to see the odd.
They've been there a long time.
Yeah, but that's because they've been there a long time, and that's one of the reasons why London has a good energy supply. You know, the reason we need these pylons or these wires. Now, I'm not an expert. I can't really tell you whether I think they're going to be cheaper over the ground or under the ground. All I can say is the Tories last year thought they were 10 times more expensive underground. Beyond that, I'm not a scientist,
Tories
of
thought
course.
a lot of things last year, by the way.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that this is the idea that this is Ed Miliband being dogmatic. This is Ed Miliband agreeing with his predecessors when it comes to pylons. The difference between Labour and the Tories is Labour have said we're willing to see down the NIMBYs. You know, if what we want in this country is to get it growing again, is to increase productivity and to have energy coming from offshore wind onto land, then we need some new pylons. Let's do it quickly. Let's do it cheaply to get this country growing. To me, the logic doesn't seem too bad. OK. You obviously don't live in this part of the world, though, do you? Well, I live in a part of the world with lots of pylons.
Well, already there.
And I feel like sometimes we're going to need more energy to go to the whole of Britain. And if people want a field that looks exactly as it has done for the last 200 years, maybe just look to the left a little bit, you know?
OK, shield your eyes, people out there, is Michael's suggestion. Emma, what do you make of this? I mean, the pylons could be in place, part of the, you know, the green energy drive that Labour promised by 2030, by indeed 2030. Meanwhile, the underground cables would take until 2034, and according to this report, would be £600 million cheaper.
Cheaper, exactly. Look, I think there's so much about Ed Miliband's obsessive, you know, dogmatic, this drive towards net zero, which, by the way, doesn't actually make that much sense, and this obsession with clean power. I'm as green as anyone else. In fact, I'm much greener because I don't drive and I cycle and I recycle and all of that. Yeah, I do cycle everywhere and I don't run a car and all of that. So I'm absolutely behind the idea of, and I don't eat meat and all of that. But I do think that there is a lot, and I really disagree, Michael, that we just need to start building. I think we need to take a breath and step back.
We've been taking a breath for decades, though.
Yeah, I know, but Ed Miliband is in danger of doing all sorts of crazy and wrong-headed things. In fact, their goal, Labour's goal, is now 2030 to achieve net zero, which many experts say is not achievable.
I have to keep checking newspapers to think it's 2024 already.
Exactly.
That's like 6 years.
2034 and £600 million cheaper, and to bury, and this is just one report, as you say, to bury the cables rather than having pylons. We are blighting our landscape. I was standing with my young son on our balcony, and like you guys, I'm near Hackney, standing looking at the skyline, and all I can see is more buildings going up over the city of
London. They're homes for people,
And my
though.
child said, no, they're not. They're empty offices, actually. And they're not affordable homes anyway. They're expensive new homes for, international wealthy people to fill. But my child said, are we going to have any skyline left? And I thought, are we going to have any skyline left? Can we take a pause to think about our country? It is a blight on rural communities. It is actually really, really disruptive. Pylons are horrible. They are unsightly. This is where we live. This is our country. We only have one country. Why not bury the cables? Why not take the time to put the wiring that we need? Yes, we use far too much electricity. We use far too much power. All of that is a problem. Why not take the time to do it in a pleasant way rather than just filling up? You saw the pylons earlier on screen. It looks horrible to have those more and more and more all over our green and pleasant land.
And in fact, in theory, it is only a 4 years difference. And by the time you've got the locals who are understandably up in arms about this, sort of like fighting this decision, it could potentially take the pylons up to 2034 in any case. So,
well, I suppose a comparison to make here. As I say, I'm not an engineer with an expert on whether it's more expensive above or underground. But I do think that we are potentially overstating this report when it seems to be against everything else that people have been suggesting for a very long period of time. I feel like this might have been jumped on by the Telegraph, who've sort of been publicising this because it fits with the politics of their readers. It doesn't necessarily seem that this is sort of an independent assessment, that this is the one report we should pay attention to. But there's a comparison here with the politics of HS2. So HS2, which I think should have gone all the way to Scotland, I think it should have gone all the way to Scotland and then all the way to Leeds, to the east as well. But what happened? You had a lot of Tory MPs in the Chilterns, in these very green places where they said we can't possibly look at a high-speed rail line going through our green and pleasant land. What did we do? We decided to bury it. That made it so expensive that we ended up cutting it off at Birmingham, and now it seems pretty useless. So I think sometimes you do just have to say to people, look, for the benefit of the whole nation, you might have to accept something which you consider an eyesore, which, by the way, people get used to after about 5 years anyway.
It's interesting because you're echoing exactly, I know you're not a fan of his, by the way, but Keir Starmer, who said, well, you're just going to have to get used to it.
I agree with him on this.
Yeah, but
it's not in his backyard, is it?
Well, he lives in a backyard he lives right next to Euston.
There are far more. Yeah, my parents live in Camden, and the whole of London has been messed around by what's the one that goes across London? Crossrail. We are permanent roadworks, basically, aren't we? And the capital city. But there's so much.
But also, our population has gone up by 1 million in the past.
What we need is east to west. We don't need, to cut a few minutes off the journey from Euston to Birmingham.
I think we need it all. I'm HS1, HS2, HS3.
But this is our country. This is where people actually live.
Yes, but people also want to get around. So in many green and pleasant places, no one thinks France. What an ugly place. They build overland pylons.
Lots
they
of
build
migrants seem to like it. They're all particularly coming over here.
I don't think that's because they want a little bit more countryside.
Well, they might do. I don't know. And because we do have to move. I just want to read out our Claudette's message. Claudette, good afternoon. Pylons are ugly and spoil the English countryside. Norfolk's charm is its natural beauty. Ed Miliband is a crank. Just no. Thank you very much. Lots of you agreeing with Claudette on that one.
Hear, hear.
But let us know what you think. gbnews.com/your say. Really easy to get involved. Now, for all the best analysis and opinion on that story and so much more, please do go to our website, which is at gbnews.com.